Good morning, everyone. Shavua Tov, Ketvach. We are in Mishna Harah, Perek Beis, Chapter 2, Mishna Zayin, Mishna 7. Just want to apologize. Thursday, due to some very serious technical difficulties, I was not able to do the shiur, the Mishnayos and Lashon Harah shiur on Thursday. I apologize if it inconvenienced anyone. Mishna Zayin, Shiur Challah. The amount of challah, meaning when you separate challah from dough, how much of the dough is separated for challah? Echad me esrim barba, 1/24th of that dough. Ha'isa isa la'atzmai, if a person is making dough for themselves, v'ha'isa l'mishta b'nai, or even if you're making it for your son's wedding, echad me esrim barba, it works with 1/24th. So what the Mishna is saying is like this. If the bread is being baked by a private person, that is where the sages said that the amount is 1/24th. Because, as we know, the minimum dough for having an obligation of challah is a dough made of 1 1/4 flour. That's not a large dough. And typically, a private person doesn't make a large dough. And when the Torah tells us to separate challah, it calls it a gift to the Kohen. If it's a gift, it's got to be something significant. Therefore, the sages said, when you're dealing with a small dough, which would be a dough made of 1 1/4 flour or of something more, to be able to be considered a significant gift, it's got to be 1/24th. And then the Mishnah says that will be so when we're dealing with a private person, whether they make a small dough, which they typically do, or there's even an occasion where they're going to make a large dough because they're baking bread for a wedding. So the dough is going to be much bigger then. Nonetheless, the sages said if it's privately baked, we have a standard amount, and that is 1/24th of the dough. Next, nachtem shu'eisa limkar bashuk. Now let's say you have a baker that he's making the bread to sell in the market, meaning this is not a private, this is a business enterprise. Or it so too applies to a woman who is baking in order to sell in the marketplace, which would mean it's a smaller amount than what the nachto, which means a professional baker, is going to be doing. Then it's 1/48th. So your explanation is we're starting off with a nachtem, a baker. That's his business. He's a baker. So he's going to typically make a large loaf. And once you're dealing a large dough, And once you're dealing with a larger dough, the sages said 1/48th of it would be significant enough. Now, let's say a private person is selling, meaning they're not a baker, it's a private person, but they bake. The person bakes dough in their home and then sells them, and then goes to the marketplace and sells them. So here too, the Chachamim made a standard amount. If anyone is baking in order to sell, then no matter what the size of the dough is, it's 1/40. It's going to be 1/48th. So if it's private, you're doing it for yourself or for a private occasion, then it's going to be 1/24th. Once doing it to sell, and it's going to be 1/48th. Even though, again, the private person, the woman is baking in her house and goes to the market to sell, her dough isn't going to be as large as the baker's, but nonetheless, the amount that's given to her is 1/48, because that's what the sages instituted. For private use, it's 1/24th. For selling, it's 1/48th. Now the Mishnah goes into a different subject. Different subject relating to the amount that you separate from the dough. Nitmes isasa. Let's say the dough became impure. Now, once the dough becomes impure, the challah you separate from that is also impure, and the kohen may not eat that. It has to be burned. So now the discussion of the Mishnah is going to be, if let's say we're talking about a dough that the challah was not separated yet from, but it became impure, which means the challah is going to be impure, how much do you have to give them? Nitmes isasa. If let's say her dough became impure. Shoigeges ayanusa, if it happened unintentionally or beyond her control. She took a utensil to mix the batter, and she accidentally took one that was impure against her, beyond her control. Perhaps all of a sudden this rodent that died, landed up in the dough, whatever. Well, that's not too pleasant, but it landed up touching it landed up touching the dough, or whatever kind of beyond her control circumstances. Let's say while she was making the dough, she got her period. All these were the examples of things that are beyond her control. So if the dough became impure beyond her control or unintentionally, then the sage just said you only have to separate 1/48. But at the end of the day, you're not. No one's going to be eating this challah anyway. So we say, all right, you can give the smaller amount. Nitmes mezida. But if let's say she did it intentionally, that is how it became impure, intentionally. And we're talking about her because typically the one who was baking the dough would have been a woman. Nitmes mezida. If let's say it happened intentionally, then she has to separate a 24th. So that the sinner does not benefit. Meaning that we're saying like this, because it became impure when a dough is, let's say, get a private dough, you have to separate 1/24th for challah. The private dough becomes impure, you only have to separate 1/48th. You're left with more dough for yourself. Again, the fact that the dough is impure just means the challah is impure. The kohen can eat it, but you can eat it. So when it becomes impure, we say that since the kohen can't eat it anyway, you don't have to separate as much. But we're only going to say that when it happened unintentionally. But to allow someone who intentionally makes the dough impure, to be able to gain from that, because if she wouldn't have made it impure, she would have to separate the 1/24th. Now that she made it impure, she's going to be 1/48th. We don't, and we're talking about she did it on purpose. And it's forbidden to allow a dough to become impure, so that because it's forbidden to have challah become impure. That's a prohibition. A person is not permitted to allow the dough, meaning the challah, and meaning the challah, to become impure. So if it's unintentional, it's unintentional. But if it's intentional, that means she did something intentionally wrong by making it impure. To now say, well, the kohen isn't going to eat so much, isn't going to eat it anyway, so you'll take off less challah, means that she gained by doing something wrong. And therefore, in that situation, even though it became impure, you're going to have to take off 1/24th, which would be the same amount if it wouldn't have become impure. We continue with the laws of Lashon Harah, Klal Test Chapter 9, Sif Dala, Paragraph 4. Asur lador b'shchunas balei Lashon Harah. It is forbidden to live in a neighborhood of people who speak Lashon Harah. Or the more so to actually join a group who's doing so. Even if your intention is not to believe anything they say. Being that you're just trying to hear what they're saying, that's forbidden. Let's say one of your students is a person who speaks Lashon Harah. He's a habitual Lashon Harah speaker. You have to distance him from you. If it comes out that rebuking him will not help, then you have to tell him that you have to distance him until you know that he stops doing it. If let's say for some reason you get stuck, you'll end up stuck in a group of people speaking Lashon Harah, and you hear them speaking Lashon Harah. If you surmise, if you size of the situation that your rebuke could help them stop, then you definitely have the obligation to rebuke them. And even if it comes out that he, again, surmises his rebuke will not help, but he won't make it any worse. Meaning, there are times if you tell a person stop speaking Lashon Harah, they're going to do it in spite. They're going to speak him alone Lashon Harah. Don't tell me not to speak about this guy. He's terrible. But let's say if you tell him to speak Lashon Harah, it's not going to get any worse. So although your rebuke isn't going to help, but it's not going to make the situation any worse, meaning you're not going to cause them to increase their speaking of Lashon Harah, here also it's not permissible to remain silent. Kipen yoimru olav, because then they may say about you, you're sitting there quiet. That means you're okay with what they say. Even though, and actually, a person is obligated to speak up if they are, speaking badly about a person is innocent. And this is actually one of the things that obligates you to leave a group of people doing the wrong thing, because he could actually be held responsible for hearing what they say and remaining silent. So even if it comes out that his rebuke isn't going to help, but it's not going to make it. So again, if it's not going to help, you're not obligated. But it's not going to make it any worse if you were to say something. So if you're sitting there remaining silent, and they're speaking against someone, and they're saying the wrong things, they're accusing him of the wrong things, you're obligated to say something to tell them to stop. Now, if by doing that would make things worse, that's a different story. You don't want to make things worse. You want them to speak worse things. But if at the end of the day it won't make any difference, then actually, if you're there and you're silent, that's a problem, because they think that you're okay. And actually, if they are saying things that are wrong about someone, you're obligated to say something. And therefore, this is really a situation that you really have to make a choice. Either you're going to pipe up or get away from there. Because if you sit there and you remain silent when you shouldn't remain silent, which means that instead of standing up for this person's honor, you allow them to continue doing what they're doing and they think that you're okay with it, then you can be held responsible for that. Then you could be held responsible for that. Therefore, this would be a situation where you would be obligated to pick yourself up and leave rather than to stay silent when you shouldn't. Have a wonderful day.